Hi.
Hello again. On page 121 of Crisis of Conscience in the chapter Double Standards, Ray has been laying out the hypocrisy of the situation in the 1960s and 70s in respect to the difference of policy. And he's so far mentioned only Malawi and Mexico and the incoherence of their policy as applied to the brothers in Mexico and Malawi. But here he widens the scope of this analysis because he's talking about other places in Latin America. But here we're back to the history of the policy as regards Mexico. And there's a correspondence that's mentioned here between 1960 and 1969. And here's the response in 1960 to the inquiry as to what brothers should do about these cards that would exempt them from military service. And the point has already come up that, well, we don't do military service, but we're in the reserves. Doesn't that kind of complicate it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What reply did their inquiry receive? The Society's answer came in a 2-page letter dated June 2nd, 1960. The second page dealt with the military issue written about. This is the page of the letter the branch committee presented to me, containing Society's counsel on their questions. Now I'm going to have trouble reading this. It's in small print and
It's a photocopy, so it's very hard to read anyways, and we don't have great eyesight, so.
But we'll try. As to those who are relieved of military training by a money transaction with the officials who are involved therewith, this is on a par with what is done in other Latin American countries, where brothers have paid for their relief through some military officials in order to retain their, get this phrase now, their freedom for theocratic activities. So that's what all of this is about. Freeing them to preach, be Jehovah's Witnesses, right? If members of the military establishment are willing to accept such an arrangement upon the payment of a fee, then that is the responsibility of these representatives of the national organization. In such a case, the money paid does not go to the military establishment, but is appropriated. It is appropriated by the individual who undertakes the arrangement. If the consciences of certain brothers allow them to enter into such an arrangement for their continued freedom, we have no objection. Of course, if they would get into any difficulties over their course of action, then they would have to shoulder such difficulties themselves, and we could not offer them any assistance. But if the arrangement is current down there and is recognized by the inspectors, who do not make any inquiries into the veracity of the matter, then the matter can be passed by for the accruing advantages. In other words, ignore it, because it has the practical advantage. Should a military emergency arise and confront these brothers with their marching card, it would oblige them to make a decision by which they could not extricate themselves by a money payment, and their mettle would be tested, and they would have to demonstrate outright where they stand and prove that they are in favor of Christian neutrality in a determinative test. This sounds like
gobbledygook. It's
and it
double
sounds
talk.
like Fred Franz
Yeah,
gobbledygook, doesn't it?
It does.
And then it's signed.
It's okay to pay a crook, but don't pay the military.
This is a dubious morality.
Yeah,
at
it
best.
is.
And then it's signed, faithfully yours in the Kingdom Ministry, Watchtower Bible Tract Society.
Although the branch's letter was directed to President Knorr, the reply, bearing the stamp corporation signature, was evidently written by Vice President Fred Franz, who, as stated earlier, was regularly called upon by President Knorr to formulate policy on matters of this type. The language is typically that of the Vice President. Yeah, I think so. The expressions this letter contains are worth noting. It would be worthwhile to take the time to go back and compare them with the earlier listed statements by governing body members arguing the alternative service issue. Statements made that neither minced words nor sought nicety of language, but which were often blunt, even hard-hitting. In this, society replied to the Mexican query. The word bribe is avoided, replaced by reference to a money transaction, the payment of a fee. Emphasis is placed on the fact that the money goes to an individual rather than to the military establishment, apparently indicating that this somehow improves the moral character of the transaction. The letter speaks of the arrangement being current down there, and says that as long as inspectors do not inquire about the veracity of matters, it can be passed by for the accruing advantages. It ends with mention of maintaining integrity in some possible future determinative test. This isn't even maintaining integrity. Bend rules whenever you can.
If this same message were put in the kind of language heard from governing body members in the sessions debating alternative service, I believe it would read more like the following. And then he has what amounts to his personal paraphrase of what Fred Franz is saying here. Paying bribes to corrupt officials is done by Jehovah's Witnesses in other Latin American countries. If the men of the war machine are willing to be bribed, the risk is theirs. At least you are not paying the bribe to the actual war machine itself, only to a colonel or other officer who pockets the bribe for himself. If brothers' consciences will let them make a deal with some official who is on the take, we will not object. Of course, if there is trouble, they should not look to us for help. Since everyone down there is doing it and inspectors make no issue about the fake documents, then you at the branch office can just look the other way too. If war comes, that will be time enough to worry about facing up to the issue of neutrality.
So he's saying exactly the same thing, but he's saying it bluntly, and just the way, he's not making it a word salad.
And Ray answers, he doesn't sign it. He signs the way they habitually sign, faithfully yours in the kingdom ministry. And isn't that the key? That this is all about freeing you to preach our good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about a consistent morality.
Okay. It is not my intent to be sarcastic, and I do not believe what is set out constitutes sarcasm. I believe it to be a fair presentation of the Society's counsel to the Mexican branch office, put in down-to-earth language, free from euphemisms, language more like that used in governing body sessions mentioned. One reason why this information is so personally shocking to me is that at the very time the letter stating that the Society had no objection if witnesses in Mexico, faced with a call to military training, chose to extricate themselves by a money payment, there were scores of young men in the Dominican Republic spending precious years of their life in prison because they refused the identical kind of training. Some, such as Leon Glass and his brother Enrique, were sentenced 2 or 3 times for their refusal, passing as much as a total of 9 years of their young manhood in prison. The Society's president and vice president had visited the Dominican Republic during those years, and visits had even been made to the prison where many of these men were detained. How the situation of these Dominican prisoners could be known, and yet such a double standard be applied, is incomprehensible to me.
So the situation was already complicated even before Malawi got to be part of the issue.
Yeah.
And he's seen this because he served in Latin America for about 20 years altogether, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so how they decide which ones are going to have to suffer and which ones are allowed to bribe, yeah, doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
It's certainly not maintaining any kind of integrity.
And I see we have a link that is not unrelated to this, about the way their take or their reasoning on biblical morality when it bumps up against their narrative that has to do with their good news, which is we have to be faithful in order to merit God's constant attention and blessing.
So
how do they deal with the
character,
biblical characters is so in character with their position about salvation.
That's right. So this one is, it's called Why Do JWs Need to Justify, Even Deny Sins of Rebekah and Jacob? And it's because they have to be the good guys and they can't do any wrong.
Yeah, I remember this alarmed me back in the day when I was a devoted reader of the Aid Book, and we have the Aid Book featured in this particular video, which is their definition of what a lie is.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See you soon.